Hey Honore, so this is going to be a tutorial to show you how to work with your scan data in Zbrush for ceramic printing. Initially I was going to do some editing of your scans just in Zbrush, but when I started working with the scan data it kept crashing the Zbrush software. So I ended up going back into your scan data in the Artex Studio software, the one that you use for the actual scanning, and I re-exported it from the Artex Studio software. So I will be using those OBJs of the re-exported data for this tutorial, and I'll also email you those re-exported OBJs of the three different bits of scan data that you have. Okay, so first things first, you're going to launch Zbrush and you're going to go up to the import button on the right hand side. So whenever you import OBJs, you use this import button. If you ever happen to be working with STLs, you go to Z plugin, 3D Print Hub, import STL. Okay, but for today we're working with OBJs, so I just go to import. With this screen recording, you won't see my sub-menus, you'll only see my ZBrush menus, but at the moment I'm just going into a folder that I've created with your heads. So I'm going to open up one of them, and once you've pressed open, you're then going to drag on the screen and hold shift and release. And holding shift just opens the model like straight up in straight orientation on your screen. I'm going to close the lightbox by pressing the lightbox button on the top. Okay, and then I'm just going to hit this edit button here. If you've got any like random shapes on your screen, like you can see I've got this weird square, if you just press Ctrl N, it clears it and just has your actual object in the screen. Now this is actually imported in quite a nice straight-on orientation. Sometimes you'll open scan data and it will be like on its side, and if you've got the floor switched on, you'll see that it's you know, it's kind of like at a weird angle within the environment. If that's the case, you need to orientate it nicely. Just a point of information here, if when you're looking at your design it's got two dots, you see like I've got two moving dots, it means that your symmetry is switched on, and before you start doing any kind of editing or rotating, you want to make sure symmetry is switched off, and the shortcut for that is the X on the keyboard. So if you press X, it will turn symmetry on and off. Yeah. So if you do import your scan data and it's at a funny angle, you're going to go up and click rotate. I'm going to switch off perspective mode, and I'm just going to use, this is called the gimbal, to reorientate the model. So if you just drag on the outside edges, and especially if you hold shift, it will lock it to a 5-degree angle. You can just begin to reorientate this. This actual piece of scan data isn't in a particularly odd position, but sometimes when you open scan data, it's like upside down and back to front. If at any point your gimbal becomes a bit skew like this one, and you're finding it tricky to navigate, you can unlock it and then you can reset it with this button. And if you feel like it's not in the center of your object, you can press the unmasked mesh center and it will reorientate the gimbal. When you're happy with it, you then just press the lock button and you can continue to you know, reposition your model. So to rotate, you're just grabbing the outside of the sphere. If you drag on the arrowheads, you'll be moving it like up and down or left and right. And these squares are for scaling. So if you press the yellow one in the middle, it will enlarge and decrease. And if you drag on one of the squares that's either green, blue or red, it will stretch it in that particular axis. So if I stretch this one, it's manipulating it along this axis. Yeah. If you ever need to undo anything, just press Command Z. But yeah, so basically just get this nicely orientated in your workspace. Then I'm just going to go back to the draw mode, and basically what I did in Artec is a fill hole function, and it's basically just sealed over your scan to make it a solid object. I kept the neck part in your scans because I thought you might want to use those in your compositions. But yeah, this process was done in the Artex software, and I did it for all 3 of your pieces of scan data. So I'm just going to import those now so that we can take a look at them. So to import further scans into a single project folder, and I mean, you probably already know how to do this, but I'm just going to go over it in case. We open up Subtool, we duplicate our subtool, we go to Import, and then we're going to just select our next scan, press Open, brings it in. Again, I'm going to use a move, and I'm just going to nudge it over, and I'm just going to orientate it so it's quite kind of straight on. If it's, maybe try and line these up. So again, just dragging this so they're kind of aligned with each other. That seems pretty good to me. And the reason I duplicated and then imported is because when you import something, it overwrites that subtool. Think of subtools as layers, kind of like Photoshop. And so when I import something, it will overwrite whatever's in the subtool that I've got currently selected. So to import the 3rd scan, I would duplicate one of my subtools, go to Import, select the 3rd scan, press Open, and again it's pulled it in, it overwrote what was in there before, and then I can again just use a move. So because my gimbal was still set to this one, I'm going to unlock it, reset it, center it, lock it again, and then I can begin to move this around. And you're working in a 3D space, so just navigate all the way around your model just to make sure things are going well. And you don't have to get this kind of super perfect. I'm just trying to get it so I can see clearly kind of what I'm working with. I might nudge that one over a little bit. Okay, cool. So these are all kind of together. And this also gives you a good preview of how the meshes are looking now that I've re-exported them, so you can see that they're all closed off. There are maybe still a few elements that we might want to get rid of. Okay, but that's how the scans are currently looking. When I center everything on my screen, I'm doing that by pressing F, so that will zoom in, and if I press it again, it will frame all my subtools. So that's a good way to, oops, just press the wrong button. That's a good way to like reorientate yourself in your document. So let's just do a quick save, and I will send you this project file. This is probably a good stage to send it to you in, where you've got everything in one document. So I'll call it Heads Editing for Array, and press save. Okay, so I'm going to pick just one head to work with for now. So I'm going to go to the top one, and I'm going to switch off the visibility of these 2. And what I'm going to talk to you about is kind of deleting stuff away that you don't want. Actually, no, let's go for this one that has these kind of floating parts, because I think that's probably a better example. Okay, so when it comes to getting rid of stuff that you don't want to keep, there's a couple of ways that you can do it, and I'm going to show you 2 different ways. So the first is using masking. So to delete using masking, you hold down Control, and that activates your masking tool. If you go over to this icon here whilst you're holding Control, it opens up the different type of masking that you can use. So you've got like similar again to Photoshop, like lasso, masking with shapes. I generally use lasso for this kind of thing. And then again, still holding Control. Oh, what's going on there? Holding down Control, I can then just mask something that I want to get rid of, yeah? And it doesn't have to be something that's like floating over here. You could also use that lasso like on the actual model itself. But for this particular demonstration, I'm just going to use masking to get rid of this part here. So once I've got what I want deleted, what I've got masked for deletion, I go to Geometry. No, sorry, I don't. Go to Subtool, Split, and split masked points. Okay, if I hit that, it's created another subtool, and that subtool contains the object that I had masked. So if I switch off the head, I can see that this subtool contains just that part which I masked and then split away. So then what you can do is go back to your head, and either you can just switch the visibility of that subtool off, or you can actually go into the subtool and delete it completely away. Yeah. So that's how you delete by masking. The other way to delete is by polygroups. And polygroups is a way to identify all the different elements within a single subtool. So some subtools might contain just one object, but some subtools like this one actually have 3 separate components within the single subtool. So I'm going to switch on polyframe. On the polyframe button, there's another 2 smaller buttons that say line and fill. So I've got polyframe on, but I'm going to switch off this one that says line. Okay, it's quite confusing in ZBrush. You've got buttons in buttons. So polyframe, line off. I'm then going to activate or associate polygroups to this object. So I'm going to go down, polygroups, auto group. And what it's done now is it's assigned each individual element a different color. Now that color is not baked into the model. If I switch off polyframe, you see it goes back to being whatever material color we've chosen. So here is where you actually pick your different materials. But if we switch on polyframe, we can see that it's allocated different polygroups to each of the elements. And that's a really good way to delete away elements without having to do lots of masking. So I'll show you that process to get rid of this part. So I'm going to hold down Control Shift, and I'm going to click on the element I want to get rid of. So click it, it's isolated it. You can then go to Subtool, Split Hidden. Okay, so what it's done now is it's split away the hidden parts, which was the head and the neck that I wanted to keep, and that's now in this subtool. And this subtool above it now just contains that one element that I wanted to get rid of. Yeah. So again, I can go up and I can just delete that. Okay. So that's how you delete by polygroup. It's a bit easier than having to like mask lots of stuff out in some cases. Yeah. So now I've got my subtool that just has the components that I want to integrate into the design. I can switch off polyframe. But one thing that I need to do before I start trying to combine this head with the other ones is I need to make my surface a quad surface. So if I switch on polyframe and have line turned on and zoom in, you can see that my surface is triangulated. And that's really common for scan data, is for it to have this triangulated topology. But to start combining it and merging it with other ones, we want to convert these triangles to quads. And the way that we do that is using something called Dynamesh, which can be found in the geometry menu and Dynamesh. Yeah. So open that menu up. If this button is already orange, just click it once to turn it black. And then what you want to do is turn the blur down. Set your resolution, let's set it to about 500, and we're going to hit that Dynamesh button. This process can take a couple of minutes, or it can be very fast. In this instance, it was pretty fast. If I switch off polyframe and just zoom out a bit, if I go back, that's how it looked before. This is how it looks after Dynameshing. You'll notice that there are some changes to the surface, and the reason for that is in areas where it's incredibly thin, or there's a cavity, when it dynameshes, it can seal stuff over. Luckily, it hasn't affected the design too much, but if you have very thin areas, you do sometimes get some changes to the surface, but there's not actually a huge amount you can do about that. If we zoom in and turn on polyframe, you can see that the surface is now constructed from 4-sided shapes called quads, whereas before it was triangles. Yeah. So zoom out. With this quad surface, we can now start to use brushes. And I understand that you don't want to kind of edit the face too much, but when you start to do the composition of all the different parts together, chances are that you are going to want to use the brush to kind of merge things and add material. Yeah? So all you need to do is repeat that process of cleaning up and dynameshing with the other two heads, and then you'll be able to start merging them together. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I'm not going to bother deleting stuff away. I'm just going to do a quick Dynamesh on all of these, just so I can show you how you can begin to merge them into your compositions. So I'm just literally clicking on each subtool and Dynameshing. Let's do that quickly. Okay, great. So now all of these have that triangulated surface, quad surface rather than triangulated. And I'm just also going to perform a quick save. Whenever you save in ZBrush, don't overwrite your previous project file. Instead, save a new version. So, you might call it like heads 1, heads 2, heads 3, etc. Don't overwrite your project files, because at some point they can get corrupted and then you'll lose your work. Yeah. So at the point when you're ready to start doing your composition, you're probably going to have your subtools lined up. If you want to duplicate any of your subtools, so have a couple of versions, you can literally just hit the duplicate button and it will make a copy. You can also rename your subtools. So if you have, multiple heads, like 9 or 10 in the one workspace, and you're wanting to nudge them around individually, but you're getting a bit confused, just name them, come up with a naming system that you can understand. So I've got a duplicate here. So if I zoom out a little bit and use the move, let's just reset that gimbal. Where I press duplicate, I've got two of these heads now. I'm just going to show you really quickly how you can begin to combine these and also to make it so it's a solid shape. So the preview image you sent me via email, you'd kind of composed them nicely, but obviously there was big gaps and stuff. And for the ceramic printer, we really need everything to be like a unified single mesh. So just to demonstrate that, I'm going to work with a couple of these heads. So let's just switch one of them off. And what I'm going to just quickly do is sort of move these into some kind of quick configuration just to demonstrate. Obviously, you're going to spend way more time getting these into your composition, but I'm just doing this to demonstrate the technique that you're going to be using. So let's just, obviously when you're doing your composition, you're going to want to think about overhangs and all that kind of stuff in terms of optimizing it for ceramic printing. I would suggest as you go, just occasionally, get everything where you want, and then maybe, send me and Fred a screenshot or something, and then we can always, or even better, the project file, we transfer the project file, just so we can check over it and just like let you know if there's any areas that we think are going to be particularly problematic. But yeah, so just beginning to nudge these around. Sorry, I'm doing this a little bit haphazardly, but let's just to demonstrate how it can work. Okay, so let's say this is your composition. This is kind of how you want them to be positioned. Currently, these are just like overlaying each other. They're not combined, and they're not even in the same subtool. Okay, so we need to get this so that they're combined, and we also need to make sure that there isn't like weird geometry in the middle. So the way that we do that is to Boolean them together, and a Boolean is when you either combine or subtract shapes from each other. So to do that, we're going to switch on the live Boolean mode. And live Boolean works with whatever subtools you have visible, so whatever subtools have the eyeball icon switched on. And if you want to combine subtools, you make sure that this icon is selected. If you want to subtract them, you change the icons around. and it will like subtract the different subtools from each other. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because it will get a bit confusing. So for this, we're just going to have all of these switched on, a live Boolean switched on. And the other thing I just want to quickly do before I begin to Boolean is make sure that there's no holes in the mesh surfaces. So I'm going to go to each subtool, geometry, modify topology, and I'm just going to do this close holes on each of the subtools, because sometimes if there's little holes it can cause issues. Okay, go back to my subtool. Live Boolean selected. I'm going to go to this Boolean menu and just hit make Boolean mesh. This can take a few moments to process at the top. Just give it a little bit of time. Okay, once it's done that, we're going to press append. And whatever's last in the append menu is the latest created Boolean. So we're just going to select that. And it drops it in as a new subtool. And so we just switch off these ones. And what it's done is it's created a subtool that has Boolean combined the three that you had selected before. So if you hold down Control Shift and just do like a cross section, and let's just switch on display properties, double. What it's done is it's combined all of them together, and it's actually Booleaned them and Dynamesh them together. So they're now like a kind of linked object, and there isn't any intersecting geometry. So this is a really good position to be in. Okay. And then what we can do is begin to kind of clean this up, and we're going to try and address the fact that there's overhangs and cavities and stuff like that. Again, there's a few different ways that you can do this. I'm going to show you a method that I think works quite well when trying to prepare stuff for 3D print. So again, I'm just going to do a quick project save. I'm just saving that quickly. And then I'm going to append in a sphere. So just hit append and sphere. Let's open it up in a new subtool. Okay, and then basically I'm going to spin around to the front, zoom out a bit, and I'm going to use the move, and I'm going to bring that sphere in here. I'm going to switch on transparency. If I switch on polyframe on our sphere, we can see it's quite like a low polysphere. That's fine to start with, because what we want to do is be able to move this shape quite a lot quite quickly. So go into draw mode. I'm going to select the move brush, so I hit brush, shortcut M, and select move. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Switch off polyframe. And I'm just going to begin to move, let's make this even bigger. Basically, I'm going to use this sphere to like fill the gaps in between the heads. So, and the reason I've got transparency on is so I can see the faces. And I'm just doing lots of nudges. You can also use shift to like smooth it in. So what I'm basically trying to do is like reveal the faces, but use the excess material almost like a putty to like to fill the gaps in between them. And again, I'm doing this like rather quickly, just to show you the process, a little bit of smoothing there. Just to show you the process, I mean, you can spend a lot more time getting this like super neat and a bit more discreet. But yeah, lots of little nudges. And as it gets more refined, you could also, bring down your draw size, and also switch off transparency. So yeah, basically you're just like pushing and pulling it around in order to be able to fill the gaps and make sure that the head's still visible. And again, a bit of smoothing. Yeah, so you just spend a bit of time going around with this. So just navigating around by dragging and adjusting my draw size. You can also, this is quite a low poly shape, it's only got 8,000 active points. Once you start to get it more refined, press Control D to divide it. You can see this now says 32,000, and that will make it a little bit more delicate in its response when you're moving it. Press Control D again. The higher the active point count, the denser the surface is, so the more like detail you can go with your movements. switch polyframe off. Yeah, so let's just squish this in, get it nice, get it refined. The thing to remember with ceramic printing is you will create the kind of vessel style in the slicing software, but we need a solid object to bring into that software. If you have cavities and intersecting geometry, it's pretty much impossible to slice it for the ceramic printer. And again, I know I am kind of blasting through this a little bit quickly and it looks a bit rough, but yeah, obviously you'll be spending more time in getting a really aesthetically accurate piece. Okay, a bit more smoothing. You could also use things like the flatten brush, you know, to kind of get this more aligned with the thing. It's, you know, I know that you've done a fair bit of sculpting in Zbrush, and if you need to, occasionally Dynamesh, just to make sure that your surface isn't too warped. Just go Dynamesh, switch this off, let's make this 500. You know, you can do that if you need to. Just get this in a bit. Filling in those gaps. Okay. And then move. What you don't want to accidentally do is create sort of weird overhangs. So, you know, as much as you're pushing back, you might also need to just be mindful of that. And you'll be able to manipulate this further and blend it in better once we've merged this into the model as well. So yeah, just be mindful of that. Anyway, I'm going to kind of stop there because I could sort of nudge this around forever and it's actually going to be you that's compiling this. So once you're happy that you've kind of filled in the gaps and it's kind of, you know, looking good, I'm going to just perform another Boolean. So go Boolean, make sure live Boolean switched on, make Boolean mesh, give it a moment to process. And then we just go to append, the latest one, select it, switch off the other two, and that's now merged the this in with these guys. If you do Control Shift, look at cross section, and switch on double, it's looking good. Okay, and then what that also means is if you zoom in, you can now also begin to like blend this in even more together. You know, I'm using the smooth brush now. You can really begin to like blend this in more nicely. And what you might also want to do is to give like a flat cut across the bottom of the design, for example. So again, we could maybe like rotate this a little bit. You know, there is overhangs here. That's something that you're going to need to keep in mind when you're positioning these. If you hold down Control Shift, open up this menu, you've got different like clip brushes, and let's go for trim curve. So I'm holding down Control Shift. If you go from right to left, so drag from right to left, and then if your line isn't in the right position, you can hold down spacebar at the same time. You can actually move this. If you go from right to left, it will cut whatever's underneath the line, yeah? So I'm just releasing now, and it's going to cut whatever's under the line. If you hold Control Shift and drag from left to right, it will cut whatever's on top of the line, yeah? So it depends what direction you go from, yeah? So from right to left, it will cut under, yeah? And again, at this point, yeah, you can just be like, yeah, just smoothing more. Again, you could also be using the masking and splitting to get rid of stuff that you don't want. There's a bit of funniness in there. And we have got some polygroups still to work with, so we could even separate polygroup, mask, bring it back, subtool, split masked. So yeah, you know, you can use this kind of deleting method throughout. Geometry, effect topology, close holes. You know, you can kind of really begin to clean this up. Yeah, I think I'm kind of, pretty much there with explaining the different kind of steps to this. Obviously at this stage you want to make sure that you haven't created like geometry that's going to be difficult for the machine. So any bits like blipping out, you know, smooth them away or use the flatten brush to get rid of them. You know, we don't want to have stuff that's going to cause the ceramic printer to really struggle. With overhangs, let's have a little look around this. This might be a bit of a problem. You could always, you know, think about orientation, but you might even get away with that. What would be a problem for sure? I don't know actually. I've obviously kind of hidden the ears, but like under the ears, for example, if you know, you could always smooth them in a bit, or if you feel like there is a bit too much of an overhang, like say if you were worried about this lip, you could actually just put a little bit of digital clay in there. So just like make that transition a little bit more of a sort of straight line, and of course you want to avoid editing the face as much as possible, but if it's a difference between it printing or not, you might just have to add a little bit of digital clay here and there to help reduce the overhangs. And what I would suggest doing is just get your compositions together and, you know, save them as a project file, transfer them to me, and I can just check them over as you go and make sure that there's nothing too problematic. I think for now that's pretty much as far as I need to explain. Obviously all this kind of stuff you'll need to make sure it isn't there, either by masking and removing or smoothing or flattening, stuff like this as well. Don't worry about like hollowing it out. A solid object is what we want, and it's in the ceramic printing preparation software that we will then get the effect of it being hollow or having openings. So don't worry about creating cavities at this stage. The idea is what we really want is a nice like uniform shape, as opposed to something with any like holes in. You know, this is like solid inside, and that's really what we want to open in the ceramic printing software. I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.